Greetings. Welcome to Dr. English's Book Lovers Book Club. I'm Dr. English and I teach English. This week I'm reviewing the book Fallen Kingdoms by Morgan Rhodes. Um, I like all fantasy books. I have a really, not really a difficult time, but I think this will be a challenging read for some people to keep track of who's in from what place. And so there's Aranos and uh, Palthea, I think it is. I never am sure how to pronounce that. Palsia, and then Limeros. Uh, and it's all part of Mythica. It's a kingdom. And so there are three kingdoms, and one, it's in some ways, it's like reminds me a little bit of the Hunger Games, and it's only three kingdoms, but the one that is, in the middle is like there's nothing but just they grow wine, grapes for wine. And so there's a bunch of poverty in there. And then Limeros is more northern, and it's still not, it's more like middle class, like, and then the Aranos that live in the southern live in all of this, glorious splendor. They have so much. And so there's, already established, from the very beginning that there's tension among these three, kingdoms of Mythica. And I think the main thing about this book is just trying to keep track of who is from which kingdom. But two people, that really stand out to me in this, of course, is they're what I would consider like uh, two uh, the two princesses. You have um, uh, Lucia and then Cleo, and the two places have a belief in their, in these two sisters that are like witches or goddesses. They consider them goddesses. And it starts off at the very beginning of the two sisters together, uh and um and they take a baby that was prophesized uh, uh, to be like the next great sorceress. And so that part is very important. And I won't give away too much more than that, but they both go seeking this child that was prophesized about. And so you have that kind of as the, in the background of the whole, all the stories mixed together. And so, and they do all kind of come together as like, the characters in this. And there's always this a sense of like, you don't really know the people as well as you think as you think that you do in each of the stories. And this just, to me, the thing that works really well in this kind of fantasy story. And I'm not a big fantasy person. I've always said that I'm ending on fantasy. I started with Six of Crows fantasies because I told my students I didn't like fantasy, and I didn't even realize until just this moment that I started with fantasy and I'm ending because this is the last book of all the 38 books that we read in the fall of 2024. It's taken me a while to finish them all because I had a few other books in the middle of that I wanted to review. But I think, like I said, now Six of Crows, I felt like really, changed my attitude about fantasy. And this one was like, well, you read one, you've read all fantasy. But I have a couple of students, while I've been subbing in high school, say, you need to read George R. Martin. And I'm like, okay, yeah, so and I feel like, he's like the king of fantasy beyond Tolkien. So I might have to read that, just to see if I, do indeed like fantasy. But I feel like in some ways the plots are very similar. And so that's why I feel like, for me, it's just really hard to continue reading the same thing over and over. I have a good friend who is a writer of like thrillers, and I think I read the first three or four of her novels, and I was like, it's the same thing over and over. And I know that's what the readers want because that's what they love about them as a writer. And so for me, it's a little more difficult because I get bored really easily. And so, but that's not to say that when I'm in the book, it takes me about halfway through the book to be like really interested, because then I think, well, I'm already committed. I got to figure out what happens at the end. And so, so I think the most important part of this is, for to show the, the real power of a myth, and to show, Joseph Campbell would be, he would be like, yeah, that's the power of myth, is like to have people believe that there is, somebody with great power uh that is yet to come, or is in our present time. And I find that to be fascinating. And so and there's always, these elder people who are looking out for signs of, has that person arrived. And so I think that's one thing that, as a reader, you're kind of like, oh, and of course, Morgan Rhodes gives hints all along the way that are really subtle, but then, the sharp reader is going to pick up on that. It's like, oh, okay, that's what's going on. And so I guess in that regard, I think in this particular fantasy, in comparison to Six of Crows, is not so much that. Seems like they were more human characteristic that they were good at. And this one is like, there's the element of magic in this one. And so as the reader, oh, excuse me, you're trying to figure out, is there a person that's in the presence at this particular time in this, fantasy kingdom, that contains the power? And then there's a little bit more too. And the excerpt I'm going to read, it talks about, like who was the first sorceress and what were the powers that they had. And if you're not familiar with fantasy, it might be helpful, for you to maybe do a little bit of background on that, as far as like, well, what are these, kinds of things that what did people believe in pagan days? So in that regard, I think it would be helpful if you're not familiar at all. And so this is the excerpt I'm going to read. It is I think it's in, I can't remember, each one of them, each chapter is like, it tells you where they're at, like in which kingdom they're in. And so that was kind of helpful too. And like, then you always knew like, oh, these were the characters that were going to be in this part of the book. All right. She was the last sorceress, Sarah said. She could command all four elements all by herself. No one and nothing else was that powerful except the kindred itself. For a girl who seemed reluctant to hear her grandmother's stories again, she now seemed eager to tell them herself. Cleo repressed a smile. So a sorceress is a very powerful witch? More than that, Irene said. Eva was one of the watchers and the beings that live beyond this world in a protected enclave called the Sanctuary. Watchers, as you may have heard in the old legends, were the protectors of the kindred, 4 crystals that held the truest, purest essence of elementia. Obsidian for earth, amber for fire, aquamarine for water, and moonstone for air. The magic could be seen inside the crystals, swirling around if you were to look closely. The sorceress wore a ring that enabled her to touch the crystals without being corrupted by their infinite magic. For as beautiful as they were also very dangerous. The Watchers guarded them to keep the kindred safe, but also to keep the mortal world safe from the kindred. A millennium ago, Mythica, which is now divided into 3 lands, was united as one, and everyone lived prosperously and in harmony. Back then, the existence of magic was as accepted as life itself. Harmony in the sanctuary translated to harmony here. Cleo remembered reading in her history books when her tutor insisted she pay attention that Limeros, Palsia, and Aranos were once one large land with no borders. It had been very hard for her to believe. The people from the different kingdoms were so different now, but once they had been united. So what happened? Nick asked. I know they say the kindred has been lost for 1,000 years. It wasn't lost precisely, Irene replied. It was stolen. While the sanctuary seemed harmonious and the Watchers devoted to guarding the kindred, which gifted them with eternal youth, beauty, and magic, there were a few among their ranks who aspired for more. More than eternal youth, beauty, and magic? Cleo asked. What's left? Power. It has always been a strong motivator for some. A quest for power, for ultimate power, is the reason behind most evils the world has witnessed. There were 2 Watchers in particular driven to take more power for themselves. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So, you have Irene, this older woman, and she's telling a little, she is someone who knows the institutional history and knows the stories. So that I think is a really good background to kind of give you an idea of like, the elements of magic and the elements of fantasy. So I would not recommend this to be read, as a whole class text, but I definitely think, your fans of fantasy would love doing this as a book club for sure. Cause I definitely had students who liked it as a book club. And if you did book talks, they could definitely do it as a book talk. And always, absolutely, I'd say for your fantasy fans, that really embrace fantasy and love the idea of the witches and sorceresses and magic elements, I definitely think you should have it on your bookshelf so a student might take it and check it out, or recommend it to your media center or your media specialist so that they could put it on the shelves for students. I I don't have a particular student I'm going to give this one to, but I am making a habit of, if I buy things from thrift books, shout out to thrift books, I am donating it to my local library for another reader to enjoy. So um, I recommend it for people who are fans of fantasy, and I'll continue to read some fantasy. If people will give me some suggestions. I've come to the end of the books that I have had my students read, and so now I'm on a quest for more books to review in the coming days. So thank you for joining me. I'll see you next time. Bye.